Welcome to America's Fractured Politics again. Today I have Reed Galen with me. Reed is prominent on Substack and has been prominent in American political commentary for quite some time. So I'm really thrilled to have him on. And I've got a bunch of questions that I want to throw at him. And I'm going to start with one right now. Um, what happens if Trump and his flunkies refuse to release the Epstein files? The red states are being deprived of money. What's it going to take to break the Trump spell? Will it be the Epstein thing? Will it be the lack of money going into the red states? Will it be something else? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, Mark, thanks for having me. I think what will break the Trump spell is when he leaves, whether or not that's from natural causes or decides to leave office voluntarily or involuntary on January 20th, 2029. History teaches us that a lot of times these sorts of movements can withstand an incredible amount of pressure, damage, and I think that the only thing that you can try and do in an electoral and a campaign sense, in a political sense, is try and convince enough of them just not to participate. I don't know that you're going to get this block of people who have been with him now for 10 plus years to just give up on him. There's a level of cognitive dissonance that has to occur, and I think it's happening here and there. The problem is, Mark, as I've often said, is that MAGA buys in bulk, but it sells one at a time, and I'm not sure we're any different now than we have been previously.
That makes sense. The one thing I'm hoping is that what you said, what you alluded to, is that they check out and don't show up to vote in November 2026. There's a possibility that'll happen, I think, because of what's going on and the fact that the economy may take a dive as a result of his tariffs, and people just may be disincentivized to come and vote. Following that up, is there a natural successor to Trump that would be appealing to MAGA?
I don't think there's a natural successor, but I do believe that the likely successor is J.D. Vance. Not only is he vice president of the United States, he's a young guy. He has the backing of the likes of Peter Thiel. You now see Elon Musk coming back to the fold. These are guys who have both enormous financial resources, but a guy like Thiel also commands an enormous amount of philosophical and ideological space on the right. I don't know that you'd necessarily call it MAGA after Trump is gone, but it will be something similar to that. And I think that, the thing about a guy like Vance is you can dislike him for any number of reasons, but he is a brilliant liar, and we are at our own peril if we underestimate his ability to talk to that both white working class, where he is, he claims to be from, or he is from, as well as the, what I call the FU white guy, the guys my age who believe that the country is on the wrong track culturally for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of revanchist, parts of Vance president or candidacy, and I'm not sure who else out there can take him on in a primary. Now, of course, I think Rubio probably will, DeSantis probably will, Glenn Youngkin from Virginia probably will. So I'm not saying it's necessarily a straight shot, but it would seem to me that if somebody was going to be tapped on the shoulder, it's going to be Vance.
He's diabolically clever, as you said it. He's got backing. And the backing has a lot of money, and it's got a lot of ideas. And I think he can go beyond 2025 to a more dictatorial environment very easily, simply because he has that backing and he's got that clever cast to him. What do you make of Trump's veiled threat to suspend elections in the event of a war that he would presumably start?
I take him at his word. I don't know exactly how he would do that necessarily. Just the mechanics of it. I guess he could withhold elections, convince people in red states not to vote. But I think, Mark, if you get to that point, we're so far off the edge of the map here that I'm not sure what any of that looks like. And I was telling some friends at a dinner last night, if there's a title of the book to be written about this period, will be Shocking Lack of Imagination. Right. Devastating lack of imagination. And so if he somehow does that and convinces, let's say some red state governors to do it, I don't know what that looks like. Again, you're not going to convince blue state governors, blue state Democratic secretaries of state, county registrars to just say, no, we're not going to do this. And then here's the other part is like, you got to somehow run the government. And if you've just decided, no, we're not going to have elections, we're going to put this stuff off, then the Constitution doesn't matter. All of the state laws don't matter. The federal laws don't matter. And as we've seen, we're pushed so far to the breaking point as far as the world we knew that should he do that and somehow really try and enforce it, then I don't know what that looks like. But I'll tell you this, the idea of that is peering into the abyss.
It is. Do you think people go out in the streets if that happens?
Don't know.
Neither do I.
I don't know.
Neither do I.
But I'm not counting on it, I'll tell you that.
Well, nothing has really brought them out into the streets in any large numbers so far, so why that?
No.
The Texas gerrymandering vote, it's gone through. Gavin Newsom's now going to retaliate. So where does this end?
Well, let's be clear. The reason why it's called gerrymandering is because of a guy named Elbridge Gerry, who I don't remember, Mark, if he signed the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, but he signed one of them, right? So this goes all the way back to the founding of the Republic in Massachusetts, as I recall. So this is not a new thing. I think what this, though, the difference here is that although Democrats and Republicans have equally gerrymandered districts, they always tried to do it within reason, if a purely political power play can be reasonable. Now what Texas is saying and what these other red states are saying is like, it doesn't matter, we've got to do this. But remember, the root cause of this is that they know that in a midterm election that Donald Trump is unpopular. In 2018, the Democrats netted 40 seats in the House. They know that maybe it won't be 40 seats, but it's going to be theoretically a lot. So what they're trying to do is break into that margin as much as they can. And what you're seeing with a guy like Newsom in California is to say, okay, we're going to try and get a few of those back. You're going to take this number in Texas. I'll try and take this number in California. The difference is that in Texas, they have unitary authority. The Republicans do across the government. In California, it's going to be up to the voters. And let me just tell you, Mark, I ran ballot measures in California for the better part of 10 years. While it is starting at about 55% in a survey I saw yesterday, the measure that would allow Democrats to redraw the maps before next year, it's far from a done deal. So the legislature could pass these bills. Newsom could sign them. You've now got 75 days or so to Election Day. It's going to be a tough climb. And remember, when it comes to ballot measures, there are two ways to beat them if you're the opposition. One is to tell people that, if you vote for this, it's the end of the world. And the other part is to confuse people so badly they don't really know what it is. And both of those equal a no vote. Again, it's a special election. I'm not sure off the top of my head what else is on the ballot. But we shouldn't be under any illusions that the Republicans will spend whatever it is they think it takes to try and beat this and do whatever they can. I've seen Missouri's potentially on the list, Florida's potentially on the list. So Ohio's, yeah. So, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised, right? Again, back to let's not be surprised. Let's have an expansive imagination. If they can do something, they're likely to do it.
Well, they've shown they will so far. But let's carry it a step further. Let's say that Missouri and Ohio and other states follow suit, follow Texas. Does that bring out J.B. Pritzker and Kathy Hochul and their likes to come out and do the same thing and basically create an arms race?
I think it does. The issue that, first of all, in a place like Illinois, I'm not sure how many more seats they have before they start, making their own seats vulnerable, right? I mean, that's the thing is that
certainly.
Not as, yeah. And then in New York, remember, they tried to gerrymander at the end of the last census cycle, and they screwed it up so badly that a judge made it worse for them, not better. So, there's a level of competence that you have to come up with, too, that the Democrats, at least in New York, have not yet appeared to have. And again, remember that they're up against the clock here. Now, I know that the New York primary is very late. I believe it's September of next year. It's more than a year away. So there is time for them to do this. But again, if you're going to do it, then you need to do it sooner than later, because not only do you want to have a sense of how many seats you might pick up, you also have to, figure out like what are those districts going to look like, who's going to run, when are the filing deadlines, and everything else. So again, it's more 3D chess than it is
And
checkers.
there are a lot of mechanics that they're going to have to jump through, and that's not going to be easy. Um, let's move to Russia and Ukraine for a second. How long do you think Trump can allow Putin to slow walk this process before he gets some pushback from the Europeans and maybe here in the States as well?
Um, I don't. That's a good question. I think the answer is indefinitely. I think that there is on the MAGA side of things, which is the majority of the party in my mind. I don't care what anybody says about the voters. There's the people in power. MAGA is in charge. I don't think they'll just cut off Ukraine unilaterally, but I think that they will make it increasingly difficult for Ukraine. As far as the Europeans are concerned, you saw that they came to Washington, D.C. after Trump met with Putin in Alaska. They're trying to placate Trump. And that seems, and it can seem like they're bending over or rolling over for Trump. And I understand that. But at the same time, they're like, we got to get through the next 3.5 years of this guy, right? We're just trying to figure out how to get through the next 3.5 years. But let me just say this about anything when it comes to peace talks. If the old saying, Mark, is that Russia with Ukraine is an empire and without it, it's not. Why do we believe that if Vladimir Putin believes that to his bones, he's going to ever give up? Why do we think that he would ever say, okay, yeah, I'll take the Donbass, so I'll take Crimea, I'll take whatever I've already got, and I'll call it a day? Why do we believe that if this is a guy who said the worst moment of his life was when the Soviet Union collapsed, he has no, near as I can tell, no appreciable opposition. There's hundreds of thousands of Russians are already dead, probably more than 1 million wounded. So their casualty numbers are outrageous. And yet,
persist.
The Russians, and yet they persist. Yeah.
Trump is a bit schizophrenic on this issue. He just said the other day that he thought the Ukrainians ought to bomb the Russian homeland. So you wonder what's going on in his mind and whether this is some clever game he's playing to try to make it seem like he's at war with Putin when in fact the two of them are engaged in a dance that's designed to disarm everybody.
I don't give Trump that much credit.
I give Putin credit,
I think he's yeah, sure. I'd give Putin credit for that. Trump is very much a lizard. He works from the midbrain down, not from the cerebellum. And I think that there are a lot of people around him who are giving him conflicting advice. You saw was it Kellogg, right? General Kellogg, who has not, I think, been famously a huge supporter of Ukraine, but I think there are still just enough people, maybe not the cabinet level like a Hegseth, or like a Vance, but the institution of the Pentagon, the institution of the State Department, right down there in the guts, there are still people who believe, like Russia's not our friend. They're never going to be our friend. Marco Rubio was chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee when they put out the report in 2020 that said, yes, Russia in fact did interfere in the 2016 election. So they might be, from our perspective, Mark, loathsome characters. That doesn't make them unaware of the stakes. And I don't think that there is an institutional blank check for Trump to just say, let's give in and let's just let Zelensky and the Ukrainians fall. Not to mention that even if you did that, it's not like they're going to give up, right? For them, this is existential. But if any game is being played, it's on Trump by Putin, not vice versa.
That would seem to be a given. You're right. Trump is a midbrain character. I don't think there's any way he's going to be able to outplay Trump at rather Putin at chess, let alone checkers, let alone chess. So I don't see him being the brains behind this operation. I see Putin being the brains behind the operation, and it's self-evident. My concern about Ukraine is that he waffles, and this spineless Congress basically goes along with him. And the Europeans are left to fend for themselves in arming Ukraine. That concerns me. I think that you're right that there probably won't be an easy path for him to abandon Ukraine completely, but I also think you're right. I don't think he wants to either.
No, and I mean, let's be very clear. Like the idea that the Europeans are restarting their own military-industrial complex is dangerous for everybody. They're not, look, they don't want the fight. They don't want to spend the money. They have been able to build very solid social democracies because the United States was across the pond, right? The bulwark of NATO. If they have to start diverting resources, significant resources, to defending themselves against a Russian aggressor, that changes a whole lot of things for European countries individually and European citizens in particular, domestically. And if you think about the Baltics, if you think about Poland, if you think about Romania, right, they've all lived under, somebody like Putin. They're not going back, at least not easily, right? The Finns aren't going, the Norwegians, the Swedes, like none of them want this back. And so if they have to, sacrifice, I think they probably will. They're not going to be happy about it. But if the alternative is letting the Russian bear sort of roam around Eastern Europe and, scare the hell out of everybody, I don't think that the Europeans as a bloc really want that either. But again, they have been the American military and financial and economic largesse has allowed them to, will help first, 80 years ago, we helped rebuild the place. But they have been able to do and build the kinds of societies and governmental systems they want because they have known we're there. And this is now, it's a time of reckoning for them too, right? We're having our own reckoning. And if we go down as a democracy, as a liberal democracy, they're not far behind. And so I think we're, you can say that, a world of hegemons is not necessarily the best thing, but a world of 187 individual countries all trying to figure out how they stay, at the top of their own game is a level of instability that's not safe either.
Yeah, we're all going to look back at the Cold War fondly.
Right.
Yeah.
At least, because here's the thing, Mark, for those of us of a certain age, that period, while maybe not healthy, not good, made sense.
It was predictable.
Right.
It fit
Right.
into a neat little box. We had an adversary, it was Russia. We had an adversary, it was China. And everybody aligned one way or the other with Russia or with China or the United States. And we don't have that anymore. You're right. We have.
And we were the good
we were
guys.
the good guys. We now have individual countries charting their own path. And you're right. If we have Europe moving into a more militarized posture, then you've got a very real possibility that pensions and various other things are going to be affected. And then you're going to have riots in the streets in Paris and Berlin and various other European capitals. So you're right. We live in a world of instability, and it's getting worse and worse. And I think Trump, to a great degree, has unleashed forces that it's going to take a while to determine what their implications are.
Yeah, and remember too that the Russian military has not acquitted itself in Ukraine by any stretch of the imagination. Now, the Ukrainians, again, are incredible fighters, and they have been backed up by both American and European defense capabilities.
As you said.
And it's existential. So they're fighting for their literal lives. But I can't imagine a situation in which if we turn on them completely. I mean, Trump likes toying with them, like he likes toying with everybody. He doesn't like the Europeans. He knows they don't like him. So he's happy to screw around with them. But remember that, like, Russia is a gas station with nuclear weapons, right? Like, if Vladimir Putin wasn't sitting on 5,000 nuclear warheads, most people wouldn't pay attention to him, right? They'd say, give me, we'll pay for your oil, and we're not even going to pay full price for it. So, like, that's really the underlying, unspoken thing here, Mark, is that, they rattle their sabers. They talk about tactical nuclear weapons. Like, there's no putting that genie back in the bottle, right? Like, if he chooses to do that, then it's a whole other conflagration that none of us want to imagine. But that's what's really keeping so many people on edge, is like, is he that crazy? Is Putin willing to do that? And you never know, right? These guys, as like, for whatever reason, is that, I don't remember who said it. There's that expression, right? History doesn't repeat itself, but human nature does. That these guys get in power and they think they're going to live forever, right? They can't imagine not being in charge. They can't. It's back to your earlier question about who's the heir apparent. Vladimir Putin has no interest whatsoever in discussing who his heir is, right? If and when he finally goes, right, he will not. Obviously, he won't be around. he doesn't care what happens, right? He so long as he's in charge and he can scare the hell out of people and flex whatever flabby muscles Russia has left, which I shouldn't downplay it. Like, that's what we're talking about here. And, that's a very dangerous place. And I don't think anybody really wants to fool with that.
And with Trump and with Putin, you're talking about aberrant personalities, people with severe psychological psychoses. Trump is surrounded by people who enable him. Putin is surrounded by yes men, and a very few of them. It's a shrinking group. He's very insular right now, so he's not getting any good advice from anybody. And if he got it, he wouldn't take it. So you're right. I think we come down to the point where when does Putin decide it's in his interest to back off? And I don't think that it is in his interest to back off. I think he will continue as he is until he gets what he wants. And he gets what he wants by basically tiring out the other side and causing them to give up. The Ukrainians won't give up. So unless they're not armed anymore, then Russia's going to have the fight of its life on its hands for several more years. So we'll see.
Yeah, but but remember that with AK-47s and Stinger missiles, the Mujahideen was able to push the Soviets back across the Rainbow Bridge, right? So the Ukrainians have plenty of guns, they have plenty of drones. It's not to say that they have enough, but again, has not been easy for the Russians, and it's not going to be.
Well, and as you said, the Russian army is not committed. They're not even an army; they're a rabble. So AK-47s and Stinger missiles can do a lot of damage. Let's switch to another mess. What does the Democratic Party do to win next year?
Oh God, how much time do we have?
What do you want?
Oh well, I think first and foremost, it can't be simply that Trump is bad. That can be a predicate, but it's not enough. We saw that it wasn't enough last year. The Democratic Party has to start to figure out how to talk not only to independent and swing voters, but Mark, to me, is those voters that I saw in tough black neighborhoods in places like Grand Rapids and Detroit, and tough working class white neighborhoods like northeastern Pennsylvania that I visited, where a lot of those people have just tuned out, right? There's this conceit amongst the Democratic establishment that quote unquote uninformed voters don't participate. Maybe they don't, but I'll tell you, the folks I met were very clear about what their choices were, and they didn't want anything to do with either of them. And so from my perspective, the Democratic establishment is still living in a world where they think that because it's a midterm election, they will win, because history has shown since 1900, it's only been 3 times that the out party didn't pick up seats. That might be true. So history's on their side. Trump does have, all things considered, pretty low ratings. But that's in a 2-dimensional world that no longer exists. So I think they have to get back to the mechanics, right? There was a story in the New York Times last week about the fact that the Democrats have fallen well behind Republicans in too many places in voter registration. Like, Mark, that's just neglect. That's not high strategy. That's just going out day in and day out and asking people to sign up to be a Democrat. And now what started as tactical neglect is now a strategic shortfall. Right, which is, it's not simply that they have voters on their side who aren't turning out. It's that they don't have enough voters. And I think that was a huge blind spot. It still is a huge blind spot. I mean, I know enough, and I have enough friends in the Democratic firmament in Washington, D.C., where they're still playing a game that doesn't exist anymore. They are having a very difficult time understanding the nature of the game they're in, which is zero sum. Republicans want to win. They want you to lose. It goes back to the discussion we were having about redistricting. They're going to do whatever it is they have to do. There's already talk of Trump getting rid of, in Congress, getting rid of the grants, the federal grants that help counties run elections, right? You get rid of that money. What does that mean? What's the practical downstream effect of that? Less polling places, shorter polling hours, fewer precincts, fewer drop boxes, longer times in line, longer waits for ballot results.
Fewer Democratic voters.
And so fewer Democratic voters. And you saw this with Trump saying, "Oh, I'm going to get rid of mail-in voting again." That's one of those, like, I live in Utah, right? Like Utah is an all mail-in ballot state. And like, tell me how we're going to get that done between now and next year. I'm sure we could, right? But I think a lot of Utahns are like happy to have the ballot come to their house. I know I am. The vast majority of, I mean, Democratic registration in Utah is 13%, right? Like, it's not like this is an issue for Republicans. And so I think there's the unsexy work of things like voter registration and party building. I think there is the very necessary work of getting out and talking to people where they live about things that concern them. Look, if Democrats aren't talking to their voters or people who should be their voters until a year from now, if you and I are doing this a year from today and the Democratic campaign and message machine is just ramping up, then it's, maybe they win on points, right? But they're not going to win like they should. And again, what we see is that you have to be able to message to your voters about who you are, what you believe in, and what you want to do 24/7, 365, right? And podcasts like this are important, but more important is going out to every place where, in an urban area, voters stayed home. In a suburban area that should have been a Democratic stronghold, voters stayed home, trying to figure out how to win back, some Latino voters. What are the issues, right? And the issues are not that different, right? Economics is always, personal economics is typically at the top of the list, right? Can I afford this? Can I afford that? Can I afford the rent? Can I afford my bills? All those other things. So, we talk about affordability, but what does that mean? What are you going to do about it? Now, remember that if they win the U.S. House, that's great. Will they be practically able to do anything? Not on their own, but you have to say, when we're in charge, this is what we're going to stand for. And so far, I think we have a very solid division between what I would call the sort of establishment corporatist left and the more progressive economic left.
Let me try something on you. I wrote a couple of posts and did a podcast where it was just me, arguing that there's an iron triangle. The triangle consists of the donors, many of whom are simpatico with Trump, at least on some economic issues. And they don't want progressives getting any farther than they are. They're already terrified of them. The second side of the triangle is the consultants who are feeding off those donors and doing very well and advising Democrats to go centrist and basically appeal to the public with nothing. I've not seen a single idea from a quote-unquote centrist that is original or is going to move a Democratic voter. It's my opinion, but, I don't think I'm wrong. The last side...
I think you're... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The last side of the triangle is the old line polls who want to keep their seats and who believe all of the stuff you said before, that we do it the way we used to do it. I sent that piece through an intermediary. I know a lot of folks in the Democratic Party have been working with Democrats, raising money and running campaigns for 30 years now. And I don't know Ken Martin, so I sent a post to him with outlining the ideas that I thought it would take for them to win, many of which were encapsulated in your earlier answer. And I waited a couple of weeks and I checked back with my friends and I said, "Did you get any feedback?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "What was it?" He said, "Interesting." That's all he had to say. I said, "Nothing else?" And he said, "No." He's not going to listen to these ideas because he's got masters up above him who basically have a vested interest in doing exactly what you described. How does it sound to you?
I think it sounds not at all surprising. I think if you go back to the beginning of the year and the James Carville play dead strategy, now how could you tell the difference, frankly? I think that you're 100% right. I think you're seeing a microcosm of this in New York City with a Zoran Mamdani, and now you've got Andrew Cuomo, and you still got Eric Adams hanging out there. But for me, Mark, the biggest red flag or the biggest siren to me was not Mamdani winning because he ran a good campaign. He's a charismatic guy. It's a Democratic city. He was a Democratic winning in a Democratic primary. Actually, let's say this: two red sirens. One was that the establishment Democrats were willing to take Andrew Cuomo, a sex pest who was a key violator of the Me Too movement, who was a righteous, no, I don't want to even say righteous, an inveterate asshole as governor, a corporatist bully to the nth degree, right? Not even a New Yorker, right? And they were willing to take that guy over Mamdani because of free buses and, government-sponsored bodegas. And I know Israel gets wrapped up in that. But the second warning sign to me was the reactionary response from establishment Democrats, even to this moment, to Mamdani, which is, to your point, the strike point in the Democratic Party is not identity politics, right? Because you have some very far left progressives who are all in on identity politics. And I think you have some very establishment Democrats who are in on identity politics because it prevents the discussion that we need to have, which is on economics, right? And so what you're seeing now, and I think you're seeing a very aggressive stance by the moderate, this business-backed, the centrist Democrats that you've seen. They are on the attack against the left, not just we disagree with them on policy. They are 100% vociferously. In fact, I got a text from a guy I know who runs a centrist organization. And I said, for a guy who says you're running the organization that's supposed to get everybody back together, you seem to be on the hunt. And he said, if they come after us, we're going to go after them 100%. And throughout history, Mark, what we have seen in times like this is that the center left will align with the right against the left. They will always claim that the left, whatever that is the bigger threat.
That's my argument. And I agree.
And I think I think you and I are, look, I was on the phone for an hour with a friend of mine yesterday who's a lifelong Democrat. And he's like, I can't believe I'm having this conversation with you, a former Republican. I'm like, look, there's times I can't believe it either. But I will say I'm not a huge fan, Mark, of big power anywhere, whether it's right, left, corporate, whatever, right? I don't like any of it. And for me, this seems so clear. If 57% of the country is living paycheck to paycheck, that is, cannot afford a $1,000 emergency if they need to, that leads to economic instability. Actually, that's a demonstration of economic instability. That leads to political instability. And if you don't address it in a way that really matters, you don't get Democrats back in charge. You get something worse than Trump because people will say, I don't care. I'm angry. We've already seen it. And if you're not going to listen to me, right? I already don't think you like me because you don't. And I think that there's a lot of elite Democrats who do not like working class voters, unfortunately. If you're not going to listen to me, then I will go the exact opposite direction to show you just how unhappy I am. And I could make an argument, although, some of your listeners might get very mad at me, and a lot of my Democratic friends and some of my donors have gotten mad at me, that yes, you could blame Ronald Reagan, you can blame George W. Bush, you could blame all these things, but Democrats were right along for the ride, right? Like Ronald Reagan started or, cracked open the neoliberal movement. Bill Clinton poured gasoline on it, right?
Yes, he did.
Right. And so, he was willing to move. I mean, think about this. To be really nerdy, Mark, I'm so sorry.
Right.
In the 1992 election, there was very little difference between George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton other than age, style, and pure political talent. The differentiator, the real difference in that race was Ross Perot. And if you go back and you watch Ross Perot's 1992 economic infomercial, it was an actual infomercial. He's sitting at a desk. It's very old-fashioned about what would happen with NAFTA. He called it all. He said it's going to be a giant sucking sound. It was. He said, look at what Japan's doing. Internal improvements, taking care of their people, all this other stuff. Perot called it. He knew it was going to happen. And then he dropped out because he was convinced that the Bushes were going to ruin his daughter's wedding or whatever, right? So he was crazy, don't get me wrong. But he wasn't wrong. And I think we're now 30 plus years downstream of that. And you have a very wealthy, invested interests in saying, I don't really care so long, to your point, your last point, as long as I'm in charge. And I think that's really the last piece. If you look back at March with Schumer and that vote where he and 9 other Democrats went along with whatever the deal was, it's because, and I have no proof of this, it's just my assumption, I'm pretty sure I would be right if somebody did give me proof, is that Chuck Schumer got calls from the heads of major banks and said, you're not going to tank the economy. You're not going to tank the market by shutting down the government. You're not going to do that. And he said, okay, you're right. I'm not going to do that. And he can, he could swathe in whatever BS he wanted to. Now, coming up at the end of September, we're going to have another budget deadline. So now I think, Mark, we're going to see this put to the test, which is, do Schumer and 9 other Democrats vote for cloture to end debate to allow whatever budget thing needs to happen so that the government doesn't shut down? And I think if Schumer does that, I think that the what's left of the Democratic coalition could shatter, and I'm not sure you'd have the time to pick up the pieces in a year, right? Because I think that, I just think that there are so many, whether or not it's activists or just mainline voters who are like, I don't know what you stand for, but every time you could fight, you don't. And I don't want to be part of something that doesn't fight. You tell me that you care, but you don't show me you care, right? And I think that's my biggest worry, is that, a very long answer to a very short question, is they've got to figure out like what it is they believe. And right now, what those 3 points of the triangle you reference, and I think it's a brilliant description of it, is how do we protect what we have that's worked for us, and damn the little guy.
Yeah, I got a chilling text of my own. I was asking a friend of mine who's in the Democratic establishment about Mamdani. I just want to know what he thought. He said, Mamdani's not going to win. I said, why do you say that? He said, because we're not going to let him. He said, we in AIPAC will make sure he does not win. It is existential for us that Mamdani lose, and we're going to make sure he loses. This sabotaging, this putting their fingers on the scale, is going to ruin the Democratic Party, because it's going to alienate younger voters. It's going to alienate progressive voters who believe that it's time for change. And it's going to show them there's no hope for change, because the thumbs are on the scale and there's no removing them.
So there, a friend of mine pointed this out to me. There's a guy named Charlie Kirk, and he runs an organization called Turning Point USA, and he is about as loathsome a character as there is in America, maybe even in the world, Mark. And he was asked at one of his mini campus things, what would you do, Charlie, to lower the price of housing in America? And you know what his answer was? I would tell Blackstone that they have to sell every single family home that they own and put them back on the market. Now, that is not neoliberal thinking. That is pure progressive economics. And I'm telling you that more and more if the average, the 57% of those people that I told you about that are living paycheck to paycheck, they might not know who Blackstone is, but if you told them they're one of the biggest banks in the world and they hold all these houses and they rent them out and everything else, they go, yeah, we should do that.
Yes, they will. Which
is the same reason why why it's so funny to see the Democrats going state-sponsored socialism when Trump takes 10% of Intel or 15% of NVIDIA's revenue from China. Like, philosophically, I'm like, yeah, that's weird. But let's put it in the context of people who are like, yeah, well, you said you want higher corporate taxes. Like, we're taking 15% of NVIDIA's money from China. Like, we should do that. They've got the money, right? So they're not calling it taxes, but that's what they're doing, right? Well, 10% of Intel, like, is it good? Not necessarily. But again, who are you offending, right? And when you see the Democrats, who are the first ones like, controlling the means of production and blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, but like, who are you arguing to? Right? Your own young base who's like, socialism might be okay. Right? Like, no, you're arguing to your own people. You're, the 50 plus, folks who, have 401ks and IRAs and maybe trusts and everything else. And they're the ones who are like ideologically upset about it. But most people are like, does that change my life? I don't think so. Yeah. So if it doesn't change my life, what do you want me to do about it? You want me to be upset about that? Like, that's not on my list.
Last question. Do these tariffs undo Trump in any way, shape, or form? Do they cause enough damage to actually bring people out to the polls for Democrats, even though the Democrats are stumbling and bumbling their way through this?
I don't know yet.
It is too early.
I don't know. I think it's too early. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, Mark, but The guy's been Teflon up to now. I'm just not sure how this is going to beat him, especially when, again, if we go back to the top of the conversation about MAGA, if they have to say, if he says we're doing this because we're punishing other countries, his people are programmed to say we're doing this because he's punishing other countries. We've already seen that ahead of the big bill this summer, when pollsters and media asked some of his voters, this could hurt you. He said, if I have to sacrifice to help the president, that's what I'll do. We're not dealing in reality. We're not dealing with rationality. And so do I think it's going to make things tougher? I think it is. But again, we shouldn't have an expectation that anybody who might have voted for a Republican, right, or who has voted for Republicans is necessarily going to vote for a Democrat. I think on a lot of those people were just the tariffs would probably keep them home. That's probably the best we could do.
It's the independents I'm thinking about that might abandon him.
Again, fine. So all right, so let's just take this quickly. If the independents abandon Trump, or let's say Republicans, and I have made the case repeatedly, Mark, that you should not invoke Trump. You should invoke Republicans because they're not that much more popular as a party than the Democrats, frankly, that you still have to provide a countervailing argument. So what would you do, right? Yeah. How are you going to make my life easier? Are you proposing to lower the tariffs, right? Are you proposing to make X, Y, or Z more affordable for me? The Democrats have to show that they are not the party of the status quo. Just let me tell you, like last fall, me and my team wore these shirts that said Democracy Defender. And it might as well said, Mark, we love the status quo. We're in an anti-establishment progressive era. And not progressive, sorry, an anti-establishment, what's the word? Not progressive. You know what I'm talking about. Populist. We're in an anti-establishment populist era. Like, that is anathema.
So take the mantle of
populism. That is anathema.
If you're a Democrat.
Right. Like, what is offending you? Right? Like, and this goes back to, Mark, I'll close with this. When you're a young Republican operative like I was, you know what the rule was? Just like Al Davis said with the Raiders, just win, baby. Right? If you win, you can figure out what you want to do. But if you don't win, you can't do anything. And until and unless Democrats decide that they want to win, then they're not going to do that because, again, there are enough people within the firmament who can survive in this environment. To your point about the donor class and the consultant class, they're going to be fine. If you work inside the Beltway and you're a Democratic public affairs firm and you have to partner with Republicans on a project, like that's what you're going to do. And you'll rationalize it. I have 100 employees and it'll come back around and yada, yada, yada. But the truth is that it's just a business transaction for them now. Whatever ideology, whatever philosophy brought them to the game is over. It's now just dollars and cents.
I can't thank you enough. This has been incredibly stimulating, incredibly helpful. I think people are going to really enjoy listening to it. Let's do this again sometime.
No, thanks, Mark. And I hope everybody will check out my Substack at the Homefront. And the podcast is the same.
Exactly. And I should have said that myself. Thanks, everybody, for listening to America's Fractured Politics. It's been great to have all of you, and I hope you'll tune in next week. Bye-bye now.